But the air is not going to heed any borders. It's going to flow across both sides. And we both are now in the same boat, literally, or in the same fog. And both countries need to do something because these have huge public health connotations. And now with Corona also spreading, the infection rates in Delhi have started spiking. That's because the air has become so dirty. And because of the cold, you stay indoors. And then there are other respiratory problems which add to the morbidity. So apart from that, of course, there is this whole loss of productivity which comes as a result of this bad air. And both countries are equally responsible for it. India more so because it's a bigger country. And if you can see the satellite map today, this red both over Indian Punjab and Haryana and Pakistani Punjab. It's the stubble fires are burning, the smoke is pouring into the plains, and this area was, as it is, quite polluted even before. I remember when I first took a trip down in the Gangetic Plain in the early 80s. In winter time, you would see a blue haze everywhere because of fuel dung cakes being burnt in all the houses, both for cooking and for keeping us warm. So we came in, but we were not so conscious about air pollution at that time. And we used to think that this was the usual winter haze. But now we're conscious about other things which are in the air, pollutants, nitrous oxide, carbon dioxide, sulfur, all kinds of things in the air now because of the huge influx of automobiles, transportation, which accounts for 80% of our hydrocarbon consumption, accounts for almost 30% of the air pollution. And then there's huge construction boom, there's a lot of dust in the air. And so, both countries need to do something about it. You can't have air quality in Pakistan and not have different standards in India, vice versa. So I think, experts from both countries need to address this issue, talk to each other about it, and maybe din some good sense into both the governments. We may not be able to talk on other issues. Every issue we pick up becomes contentious. I've been working on the river waters and the groundwater issue. It's become contentious. Not even willing to exchange maps on this, on where the water comes from, where the water is going down, what are the aquifers like. We don't want to exchange that also. It all becomes national security. And then, in every conference, I'm glad there are no military people and no diplomatic corps people in this gathering. With every meeting you get these guys, they turn it into a wrestling match. They're all scoring debating points, and we never get any light at the end of the day. So I'm glad Happy Mon has put us, ordinary mortals into this to discuss our problems. And I'm hopeful that we will have a good discussion today. And as Tisha said, I'm sure she's going to keep a close look at the clock. I've got a clock up ahead of me also, so 12 minutes it is for each. And since the event is being conducted from Delhi, I will first invite our guests from Pakistan to take the chair. So, let's start with the lady who's here, who's been introduced. So, Anam, will you want to start first, or would Rafay, what have you all decided among yourselves? Who's going to start off? So, I respect, I know in these track twos, we all have these internal discussions before on who will go first, who will go second. So you all decide who wants to go first. But Pakistan, it must be.
Anam, let me know what are you comfortable with?
I think, Rafay, because you're so much more well-informed, I'd let you take the lead, and then I'll follow up with whatever I think I could add to that.
We're well-informed. We're experts because we live this, that's why. But thank you very much. And thank you, CSDR. Thank you, Mohan Saab. Thank you, Happy Mon, for organizing this. It's such a privilege, and a real privilege to be able to speak on an Indo Pak issue as important as this. Let me try and give a background as best I can about the causes of air pollution in Pakistan. It's a bit of a misnomer because, as Mohan Saab said, this air pollution doesn't respect boundaries. The problem with analyzing the causes of air pollution in Pakistan boils down to the fact that we don't have air quality meters. Environment is a provincial subject, so the responsibility of air quality monitoring, both of industrial emissions and of ambient air, falls on provincial environment protection agencies. Punjab, which is the most populous province where I live, which has a population in excess of 80 million people, has only 3 functioning air quality meters, from which it is absolutely impossible to get an assessment of how bad the air quality is, not just in Lahore, but leave alone Punjab and the rest of Pakistan. And it's also impossible to get a real-time assessment of what's going on. So in the absence of this, there have been studies in the past conducted by the World Bank, and most recently under the auspices of the World Health Organization, which conducted a study with the government of Punjab's Agriculture Department and released its findings in early 2019. Under this Smog study, which looked at only 11 of Punjab's 36 districts, roughly 45% of the air pollution year-round in Punjab, in Pakistani Punjab, comes from the transport sector on account of the barely Euro 2 fuels and incredibly high sulfur content in the diesels that we have in our transport sector. And approximately 20% each emissions coming from the industrial sector and also from energy production, because a lot of energy in Pakistan is furnace oil, again, a lot of sulfur and coal. And then the remainder 15% are your miscellaneous emissions, such as crop burning, fugitive dust, construction dust, and, secondary aerosols, and so on and so forth. Now, this gives you a broad sort of understanding of where the air pollution is. And I'm not going to argue that it isn't this case, but I'm sure the situation is more nuanced because this study was conducted primarily in agricultural areas. It doesn't look at all of Punjab. And I think if we had an urban-based source apportionment, we might get some slightly different figures and some slightly different sources as well in terms of what's causing air pollution. But nevertheless, this is a good working sort of starting point. That is the transport sector, the energy sector, the industrial sector, which are the major causes of air pollution. Within this, so we figured that out. Now, in terms of measures being taken by the government of Punjab, we have witnessed smog events or poor air quality every winter since 2016, whereas air quality has been poor in Pakistan and Pakistani cities from as far back as I can remember, and certainly recorded in the 2005 World Bank Environment Assessment for Pakistan. So air quality is an endemic issue. We've had smog seasons or smog events for the last 5 or 6 years. The measures that we've taken, and I'll take these chronologically, is that we blamed India in 2016, 17, 18, and 19 for the crop fires bringing smoke over the border. This year, however, the sort of civil society debate and pushback has been able to demonstrate that it's westerly winds at this time of year which actually carry wind in the opposite direction. And really, it's incorrect to, think that you can absolve yourself of any responsibility by accusing Indian farmers of crop burning as the sole cause of the smog season. We've also blamed crop burning every single year as if it was the major source of air emissions or air pollution emissions. But we have to keep in mind that crop burning is a 2 to 3 week practice that takes place only twice a year, in the April, May, and October, November crop changing seasons. So this is not a year-long issue. It's actually a very localized and it takes place over a small period of time. And actually yesterday I was in court where there's a public interest litigation in the Lahore High Court taking place. In the absence of any substantial executive action on air quality control, our judiciary has taken the lead through public interest litigation. And I was in court yesterday when the judge presiding ordered that rupees 50,000 be charged as fines for anyone found guilty of burning crops during this season. We've also blamed brick kilns for smoke emissions. And certainly the brick kiln technology in Pakistan is medieval at best. And what the government of Punjab has done is taken a policy position that these brick kilns should be converted to what's known as zigzag technology on account of how they might reduce emissions. And while this is a very strong policy position, and indeed zigzag technology does reduce emissions, we don't have any studies in Pakistan that demonstrate that zigzag technology bring gaseous emissions to within the environmental quality standards prescribed by law. And secondly, we seem to be overlooking that there are other emission control technologies which might be as, if not more effective than zigzag brick kilns, and also cheaper. So the policy position is also restricting brick kiln owners in the types of technology alternatives that they may investigate to reduce air emissions. Beyond this, the present government, the PTI government, has introduced two measures, both of which on the face of it have been claimed to be because of air pollution and to reduce air pollution. The first is the announcement of an electric vehicle policy in late 2019, the ambition of which is to make Pakistan a regional manufacturing hub for electrical vehicles and to slowly transform the existing combustion engine stock with EVs by 2030, thereby not only reducing Pakistan's oil imports and outflow of dollars, but also improving air pollution. And secondly, the government of Pakistan's announcement that it would no longer be importing Euro 2 petroleum products, but instead would be importing Euro 5 petroleum products as of December of this year, and then diesel products as of June of next year. While these are good initiatives, I might point out that the electric vehicle policy has been effectively stymied by the four-wheeler automobile industry here in Pakistan that felt it hadn't been properly consulted in the process. So the policy has been approved, but has been stalled to the extent of four-wheelers. There are investments going on with two-wheelers, three-wheelers, and public transport. But this stalling of the policy for four-wheelers also puts into question the rollout of the sort of charging station infrastructure that's also necessary to make a policy successful. And as far as the notification for the improvement of fuels is concerned, while there is now the import of Euro 5 into Pakistan and it is available in the market, it isn't enforced as the only fuel automobile owners can use or put into their cars. Smog and air pollution is very much a transboundary issue, not just within Pakistan's sort of federating units, but an issue that stretches from Kabul to Calcutta. We are, after all subject to the same weather pattern that brings us this air and the pollution, which is the monsoon, Mohan Saab, something that we have talked about in Chow's water dialogues between India and Pakistan. And it's ironic that the same seasonal wind conditions, the monsoon for half of the year and the westerlies for the other half, are also responsible for us sharing pollution throughout South Asia. It also has climate repercussions and impacts because some of the air pollutants produced are also greenhouse gases. And as far as Pakistan is concerned, for a non-industrial country to have life expectancy reduced as much as 2 years in most cities and 5 years in Lahore is quite a startling fact and something that should be taken serious attention of if we hope to increase our industrial activity. And it is, of course, a massive public health issue, as Mohan Saab also pointed out. Without a single organ in the human body not at risk from some sort of ailment on account of air pollution. And I don't mean to burden this point, and everyone knows that children and senior citizens and pregnant women are more at risk, but the fact is no one is safe from any levels of air pollution. There have been some initiatives on transboundary air quality. In SARC, there has been the Mali Declaration on Air Pollution, which, as far as Pakistan is concerned, hasn't gone very far because our investments in the air quality monitors that were supposed to be the backbone of this Mali Declaration hasn't been a very successful rollout. Like I mentioned, we only have a handful of monitors. The other transboundary air pollution agreement that I quite often reference is the ASEAN Haze Agreement, which, although has taken many years to come to life and actually bring Indonesia within its fold, is an example of how two contentious countries can actually slowly, using technology and shared information, slowly bring a region to understand air pollution issues as serious political issues. In terms of what sorts of forums we can use to sort of mobilize activity on this, I have a couple of suggestions. Firstly, platforms like this are a fantastic opportunity for all of us to share experiences across the border. This is something, after all, like none of the other environmental issues I've had the opportunity to work on. For example, water pollution is something people, especially affluent people, can buy themselves out of. Air pollution is something that no one can buy themselves out of unless you're flying out of the country. And it does bring everyone together in a way that I haven't really seen in any other environmental issue. And I think this is something that could be leveraged. We need better source apportionment studies in Pakistan. And I think we can benefit from the types of studies that have taken place in Delhi and in India through organizations there and also civil society initiatives. We also need to have better health studies of the impacts of air pollution on health in Pakistan. There is to date only 2 studies, one in Karachi and one in Lahore, that link air pollution to health issues. And we need to have far more robust data to take to our stakeholders and decision makers so that they have information that they can make policy decisions on over here. And lastly, and most importantly perhaps, we lack a common vision of what we want. Something that can be boiled down to maybe a sentence or two and which can last longer than our 5-year political cycles. Because tackling air pollution is a long-term issue and it requires a vision that has a sort of length and breadth and can be shared with everyone. So those are the 4 things that I'd like to end on. And thank you once again for inviting me. And for
we'll come back again to this topic, Rafay, on what 2 countries can do. But let's come back to our side of the haze. And who would like to speak first from the Indian side, Chandra Bhushan or Karthik? Have you all...
we have a
Chandra, please go ahead. Please go, Chandra. Please go, Chandra.
All right, Karthik.
Yeah.
You can start off.
Yeah, Karthik, you start.
Yeah.
Oh, are you certain, Chandra?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, everyone, for having me on here. Really pleasure. I mean, I'm kind of representing my colleague Arunabha here. He's, I think, he was asked to do this, but he wasn't in a position to do so. I think I concur with everything that Mr. Alam has said, and I can't imagine the situation is very different here. Of course, on many fronts, whether it comes to Euro 6 and perhaps some of the technology aspects, there may be some advancements that have happened here in India in recent years. There is little to take solace from overall, though, in terms of how we fare differently. And of course, we are all very happy when the winds are blowing the other way in Delhi, because it carries whatever little pollution, it can, right, way to a different place. And unfortunately, it happens to be, borders across in Pakistan. And as Mr. Alam has all rightly said, when the westerlies do come in, it brings in pollution from, Central Asia, from, the Western deserts, the dry areas, and unfortunately, it adds to the pollution in Delhi. The good part, though, as far as I think as far as India is concerned, and when I say India, sometimes when I superimpose Delhi on India, that's where the debate is the hottest. But by no means, right, is Delhi the hotspot, right? I think the situation is equally bad across the country. We have of the 200 plus monitors that we have, which is of course recent development. We didn't have these many, even as recently as maybe the early parts of the 2010s. A tenth of them, or a little more than a tenth actually, right, is situated in Delhi, which tells you also of this, this inordinate importance that's been given to this geography, whereas we're really not sure of what the levels of pollution are in rural areas and rural bases. And one of the things that, of course, in India that we understand, and this is something that Mr. Alam, that you didn't quite refer to in your discussion, was the use of solid fuels in rural cooking, right? And this is something that has increasingly been recognized as a big contributor to, of course, ambient air pollution and increased exposure, for women and children within households itself. And I think, this is, of course, also, comes at a time where, there has been recognition from the central government that, with the schemes that have been brought in, that we need to transfer everybody from solid fuel cooking to cleaner fuels like gas. And as a result, there's been this Ujjwala scheme that has been rolled out, which has given access to a lot of people, but again, it's still out of reach financially for a lot of homes. But we think that solving that will actually improve the lot of rural India in a significant way, and of course of the urban areas that adjoin many of our rural centers. So that is one area which I think is very easily addressed as far as India is concerned, primarily because it's a top-down policy of subsidizing and ensuring that you're able to make it more affordable to a lot more households. But the real challenge lies in that both countries, Pakistan and India, given our endowments, right, whether it comes to farm animal ownership or the predominance of agriculture in rural livelihoods, find it far too easy to access that material for burning within our households. So unless we sort of make an alternative commercial use of that possible, it is very unlikely that even if you gave away LPG at very, very low prices, right? Households will still probably think I'm better off, burning biomass. So that is a big challenge, but it is a big opportunity also that's presented. Much can be said about, of course, the sources of pollution. And again, as I said, unlike, Mr. Alam described Pakistan's sort of broad contribution as, being so many percentage, that varies drastically across the country, depending on where you are, of course, in India. It is, by and large, a 4-part problem or a 5-part problem, if you can think of it. There's transport, there's industry, there's construction and demolition dust, and then there is from various other industries that contribute to it, and then of course there's household based air pollution. In our cosmopolitan or rather in our metropolitan areas, transport is big. And this is where again the challenge lies. I think in even Delhi has a very progressive electric vehicles policy, one that has to be lauded. But again, this is a policy that will probably change things 10 to 15 years from now, because the stock of vehicles that we currently have, even if it is going to be Euro 4 to Euro 6 eventually, or will get replaced, the ability of electric vehicles to reduce that is not significant in the next 10 years. And we've got this economic, this demographic dividend of of the young population that will basically be growing up in that 10-year frame, and we're compromising the health and the productivity of all of them. So we really have to look beyond what this electric vehicle policy can do. Be that as it may, it will provide economic opportunities for growth of the sector and to contribute to the manufacturing output of the country. Relying on that to really change the quality of air in a place like Delhi, or for that matter any other part of the country, is perhaps misplaced trust. And one of the challenges, of course, is that most policies that we see, right, that look at addressing air pollution, look at it from the perspective of what can be done. I think the solutions really address the problems for the rich, may I say, right? In India, for instance, right, where more than 60% of the population basically suggests that public transport is basically my go-to option on a daily basis, right? We're not really addressing public transport in a concerted manner. And I think that is something that, again, where we are, amiss. As a result of not having addressed public transport, we have this burgeoning two-wheeler population in India, and equally, I'm sure, in Pakistan as well. And and at the end of the day, that is a massive burden, right? And two-wheelers come in all sizes and shapes, and and all kinds of fuels go in, adulteration happens, and as a result, we've just added to this pollution burden. So, while it's easier addressed through electric vehicles, that's again a big challenge. So, a lot of the problem really is because the solutions that we have in place today speak to the the richer population, whether it is the way we plan our cities, the focus inordinately on building out private roads, roads for instance, as opposed to increasing the access to public transport. All of these are challenges that I think many cities across the country are grappling with, and because we're not given that focus, we're kind of locking ourselves into those options that will sort of really take us further down that road. And unless we really break that cycle, it is very unlikely that transport as a source of emissions will go down. And India, of course, has a big burden coming from the use of coal. We have nowhere close to, of course, the likes of China, which has had orders of magnitude higher use of coal over the last 2 or 3 decades. But I think we definitely can do a lot better when it comes to the mitigation technologies. But our urban centers, again, not so impacted by the coal use itself. We've had legislation now for over 5 years saying that power plants need to sort of achieve their emission standards. But again, like with any other setup, we have industry pushing back, saying that it will make energy more expensive. Again, looking to renewable energy to solve this problem is again looking at the sort of barking up the wrong tree, because we see these assets being used over the next 10 or 15 years, and it's very important that we communicate the damage that these inflict on the health of our population, so that the broader population can get behind it, as opposed to looking at it merely as an increase in the cost of electricity for them. And I think that's unfortunately how our utilities are selling this problem, saying that mitigating pollutants from our power plants will basically make electricity more expensive. We're already in the doldrums, and how do we basically get out of this? And again, the challenge goes to the inequity in this entire issue, right? And as we've highlighted through our research here, we find that a citizen, a resident of Delhi, for instance, right, through the winters when you're probably consuming less than 200 units of electricity, are probably paying nothing for your electricity, whereas a resident of Jharkhand or Rajasthan who's probably paying closer to more than 1,000 Indian rupees on for the same level of consumption, right? So that amount of money that's being given away by the government as subsidy could be used in so many different ways to ensure that these kinds of mitigation technologies come into place. But unfortunately, we're targeting our resources, which are precious little, at the rich and people who can afford it. And that, I think, is really been the bane of the entire pollution issue. We've been addressing this in a way where we've been giving away freebies on all forms of energy consumption. And that finally brings us to, I think, the last point that I'll make, which is regarding the seasonal crop fires, right? And as you've probably been discussing in your water track 2 dialogues, underground, groundwater is such a precious resource in the Punjab side in India, which has been going down by hundreds of feet over the last decade or so. Despite the policy to sort of shift the cultivation in the Kharif season by about a month, has not done much to really stave off the depletion. And we still find that water levels are dropping, and it's very likely that it'll come to sort of like this abrupt shift where it'll not be possible to have agriculture go on in the way it has been in the Punjab side in India over the last 3 decades. And only when that shift happens will we really realize that what damage we've actually inflicted, because it will probably turn into sort of like an arid desert for want of water resources, despite the rivers that flow through it. And that's sort of been the consensus in the research community. But we're really focusing on the air pollution problem here, which is a result of this, again, concerted push to cultivate rice in an area that originally didn't want it to. And unfortunately, now that we want them to sort of really rethink the cultivation of rice, they're like saying, that's all I need, that's all I know how to do, right? So the effort to sort of train the farmers to cultivate different crops and to sort of create different markets for them has not been there. And I think these sort of knee-jerk fines that have been instituted on them, saying if you burn, I'll charge you so many thousand rupees, is just not going to work, primarily because everybody knows they do not have the wherewithal to pay for it. So I think it ultimately must come to a point where we recognize and we empathize with the situation that they actually are in right now, and do this in a manner where they sit across the table, which is unfortunately not happening, as you can see in the news right now, where there's a face-off between farmers and the central government. And I think the same sort of face-off will happen if you were to take the same path of don't burn or pay a penalty, which the Punjab government, in all honesty, has not done. And I think that's sort of been really the saving grace as far as I think not having them come to the streets when every year, but this has to be dealt with in a different way as well. And I think what I think has really been helping cities like Delhi is the meteorology every now and then, right? Clearing it up with a western disturbance or a monsoon shower here and there, and really nothing else has been doing us any favors, because over the last 5 years, pollution has really just gone from bad to worse, and it will probably continue to do so until we have concerted action. Thank you.
Thank you, Karthik. Adam?
Thank you, Mr. Guruswamy. I'm honored to be a part of this very distinguished panel. I think Rafay has covered a lot of the sources of pollution on the Pakistan side of the border. The question that was actually put to me was, what are the major sources of the air quality decline between Lahore and, well, Pakistani Punjab and the Punjab on the other side of the border? And of course, the issue that always comes up in terms of this is the stationary sources of air pollution, which is got a lot to do with the crop residue burning. And in our media on both sides of the border, the crop residue thing appears to be a very significant issue. And there's a lot of misconceptions surrounding it. And there's a lot of political point scoring that has taken place in the past on this issue. The burning of crop residue is actually something that's a result of the mechanized harvesting that has started post 1980. And results basically in the stocks being left due to the mechanized harvesting. What I would like to actually point attention to at this stage is that a study in the Punjab in Pakistan found that actually burning the agricultural residue was 34% cheaper for farmers than actually using the residue for another purpose, such as, for example, livestock feed. So this is something that we actually have to take into account, given the fact that on both sides of the border, on the Pakistan side as well as on the India side, you have a lot of small scale farmers. And you have to take into account the cost efficiency of various methods for dealing with this. So it's convenient to put bans on it, like Rafay has just mentioned that there's a 50,000 rupee ban, for example, that's been proposed on agricultural residue burning. But looking at it from the perspective of the smaller scale farmer or for the agricultural community, and given that the Punjab on both sides is the breadbasket for either side of the countries, what is the impact that we're looking at for a smaller scale farmer? There are technologies being encouraged. So for example, there's the happy seeder. I do know that it has been piloted in some areas in India. And the happy seeder basically harvests the crop residue and at the same time also plants the seed for the next one. But again, this is a very expensive option. It is around $2,000 investment. And then at the same time, for the government to make agricultural subsidies, there's also a lot of work that still needs to be done for that. So one of the main things that we actually need is technology transfer at this stage. At this side of the border, for example, in Lahore, a study from 2005 to 2006 actually showed that diesel emissions and biomass burning, as well as coal combustion and secondary particulate matter, were some of the biggest sources of PM 2.5 or in general air pollution in the country. Diesel emissions, as Rafay mentioned, there is the law that is now going to ban the import of any fuel below Euro 5, so the ban on the Euro 2 fuel. However, there are already alarming reports coming in of the cost implications of this as well for the common person. So the Euro 5 fuel is much more expensive than the Euro 2 fuel for obvious reasons. And this has sort of resulted in also the smuggling of cheaper fuels across the border, which has led to a number of problems of its own. So, for these transitions to be made, it's very important for policymakers to actually take into consideration all of these various aspects and the cumulative results of such ideas. And then coming back to the crop residue burning thing, actually, just to set this this issue to rest. One of the things that actually, we were looking at the fire radiative power across both sides of the border from January 2010 to December 2014. There's a very detailed study about this. The FRP observations in Pakistan's Punjab were actually a little bit of a magnitude lower than India for this time period. There are various reasons for that. It's the prevalence of mechanized harvesting systems. There's also the various choices between cropping patterns. So Pakistan has generally 3 major crops, whereas India has 2 in that same region. And at the same time, there's also, as Rafay mentioned, the factor of temperature inversion that naturally takes place in the Indo-Gangetic Plain during this time period that also traps certain pollutants within the troposphere. But at the same time, it's also important to note that the atmosphere is well mixed. So regardless of the fact that if there is a certain amount of pollution on the Pakistani side, and whether or not that air pollution is being transported to the Indian side, or at the same time vice versa from the Indian side to the Pakistani side, actually these studies indicate that this kind of transboundary crossover of the air pollution is actually quite minimal. However, we have to remember that the atmosphere is very well mixed. This is something, as a climate change activist, we all know this, that it takes around 50 days for example, emissions that have been released in New York to possibly impact us in Pakistan or in the South Asian region. So the gases in the atmosphere travel. And so regardless of this argument of who set the fire and what happened, we have to remember this as a very important fact. I would just like to move on actually to what Pakistan has been doing. There is recently been an initiative by the Ministry of Climate Change in Pakistan, since there's no, other than the Pakistan Environmental Protection Agencies, there's actually not really a dedicated agency for air quality. So it comes pretty much under the Ministry of Climate Change. They are developing an air quality policy as far as we know. Now, this is contested because air quality is technically now a provincial issue, and the Ministry of Climate Change should be advising the provinces or the subnational states on how to do this rather than leading it itself. At the same time, there has also been, at the Punjab level, I believe Rafay was a part of the group that did this. There was, in 2017, a provincial government in Pakistan released the policy on controlling smog. again, the policy directive points to near-term actions and prioritizes, for example, satellite monitoring of crop burning residue and public health advisories to limit the harmful impacts of pollution exposure. But most importantly, I think Rafay has covered a lot of this, is that cooperative regimes for air pollution have taken place in the past and they have been successful. So Rafay did point towards the ones taken in Asia. So the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, the Cooperation Plan on Transboundary Pollution in '95, then a 2002 agreement on transboundary haze pollution, etc. And then at another level, there's also the LRTAP, so the Long Range Transboundary Air Pollution Convention of 1979. So back then, it includes all of the countries of Europe. And they have successfully agreed on 8 protocols as part of this convention. And it includes all of the member countries of Europe, as well as the former Soviet Union and the United States and Canada. And what they have been successful in actually is agreements regarding scientific cooperation between these countries, as well as then emissions reduction targets that they have all agreed on. So it's not impossible to do this. In general, however, for forming a cooperative international regime, there are 2 things that have to happen. And I think that this forum is signatory to this actually, that it's actually easier and it's actually much more viable for intellectuals, academics, and civil society on both sides of the border for any international cooperative regime to come to agreements and consensus than it is for political parties to do so. So for the implementation of any cooperative regime, there's generally 2 phases. The first phase is actually about framing the problem. So what is the problem? So like Rafay said, at least on the Pakistan side of the border, we don't have much data on air quality. So you can't manage something that you can't measure. So if we don't have the data on either side of the border, how are we going to come up with a plan? So the first phase of any international cooperation, if Pakistan and India want to cooperate on air pollution, the first thing is to define the problem. So what is the relevant knowledge? What are the relationships between the parties responsible for the problem? Who is affected by the problem? And basically, it's cooperative scientific research. So building a common understanding and a common consensus on the physical aspects of the problem. Environmental problems are generally very complex. And like we said, human health impacts cannot be really quantified. You can put an economic cost on them sometimes, but quantifying them is another challenge. However, at least in the first phase of developing an international cooperative regime, you at least get to define the interests and positions of the 2 parties involved. So you would get to define the interests and positions of Pakistan and India. There is a chance that no agreement is reached, but at least the positions will be defined. The next part, this phase generally, results in setting terms for further cooperation or codifying positions and laws that parties are likely to hold or are likely to adopt. The second phase then builds on this. So the institutions and the agreements that are built in the first phase that involves generating research, etc., and the creation of more complex and sub-policy agreements, which may include emissions reductions obligations like we see in the LRTAP and in the Asian countries' cooperative agreements. So, these are examples that it has been done in the world before to various degrees of success. The Malay Declaration, for example, had the possibly have been the LRTAP of Pakistan, of South Asia actually, but it didn't because of the lack of implementation and also because it hasn't really been taken seriously. But we have seen in the case of other countries that international cooperative regimes on air pollution have actually taken place, and they actually have been successful in reducing the amounts of pollutants in the air. So for Pakistan and India, actually, the underlying message and what I'm going to close off with is that we actually have much more to share and much more to learn from each other than we do from mudslinging and accusing each other of burning crop residues, actually. The scientific evidence does point to the fact that actually what happens on either side of the border is very similar. A crop residue burning does take place on either side. But at the same time, as 2 countries, our issues are very similar as well in terms of vehicular emissions. We have been investing, Pakistan has been investing, for example, in mass rapid transit on very heavily government subsidized programs, which are very criticized. I'm sure that you have heard about these. And yet these are also not being seen to be successful. So just this morning in the newspaper, there was the announcement of another, because the mass rapid transit system in Lahore, the BRT, has not been viewed to be very successful. There's actually been the launch of another Lahore Clean Bus or Punjab Clean Transport Company to provide even more large buses to make up for what the BRT has not been able to do. So this does point towards the fact that yes, mass transportation is probably the way to go. And this is something that we see on both sides of the border. Karthik has also indicated this. The shift away from two-wheelers and issues like this. So there's a lot more to learn from each other. There's a lot more to gain from scientific cooperation. And as we can see through forums such as this, this is actually very much viable and possible.
Thank you. Chandra Bhushan ji.
Thank you. After three distinguished panelists have spoken, I can see the differences and similarities. Frankly, my colleagues from Pakistan are saying things which was maybe about 10 years before in India we were talking, both in terms of technology, as well as in terms of fuel or the lack of monitoring or source apportionment that Pakistan is struggling. I think about 2012, 2015, this was the debate in India at that point of time. And from then we have progressed. But before I come to the point of how much we have progressed or not progressed, as well as what kind of cooperation should happen between India and Pakistan, let me recount an experience. A few years back, I took a morning flight from Dubai to Delhi. And I'm sure some of you would have taken that flight. And if you look out of the window, and I was very excited because that was the first morning flight I had taken from Dubai. And I wanted to see the ground, how it looks like. Now, the moment you cross Indus, there's a clear ecological difference that you can see, an air quality difference between the western side of Indus and the eastern side of Indus. Eastern side of Indus is your desert area. You can see the desert of Balochistan and Sindh. The air quality is crisp, clear. But the moment you cross the western side of, opposite. The moment you go to the eastern side of Indus, you see green land. It means agriculture is predominant, but you see also huge amount of smog. And that continues from the Indus till you land in Delhi. Now that tells you that the ecosystem that we are talking about from the eastern bank of Indus till Delhi in that flight, as I took that flight, in fact, I have a video recording of that. Maybe I'll put it up sometime. You can clearly see the difference. That air quality changes from the border of Indus till Delhi, and I'm quite sure with some variation, it will also move till Kolkata. So this is entire Indo-Gangetic plain. You can see it as a funnel which on one side is your Himalayas, and on the other side, in our part of India, it is Chota Nagpur Plateau and Deccan Plateau. And your air is getting trapped in this area. So that this entire area has similar ecological conditions, as well as geographical conditions that we need to recognize. And therefore, there will be transboundary movement of pollution that will happen in some season from our side to Pakistan, in the other season from Pakistan to our side. In winters, generally, it is in the westerly side, northwest side that air moves, and therefore there is a lot of blame on Punjab and Haryana for polluting Delhi. The second point I want to make is that the ecological changes in this area has also happened simultaneously. Anyone who looks at history will remember the setting up of Punjab Canal colonies in 1880s. So if you look at how the ecology of this entire area have changed, first of all, this part of the world is the most ecologically changed. If any part of the world where ecology has changed the maximum, from forest and grassland to agriculture, it has happened in this part of the world. From Sindh till West Bengal, the entire Indo-Gangetic plain hardly has any forest cover now. The entire area has been converted into land and agriculture. Now, in 1880s, British started something called as Punjab Canal Colonies. And large-scale canal was built in Punjab, Pakistan first, and then in Haryana, Punjab, and Western Uttar Pradesh in India. We continued that practice post-independence as well. Why I'm making this point is that while everyone is talking about pollution from automobile sector and industrial sector, I think we are missing one big important point. That is air pollution coming out of land itself. Now, why I'm saying this, again, is if you look at the data during pandemic, and India, we have just, Pollution Control Board has just published its report on air quality during pandemic. And what we found when everything was shut down, transport was down, industries were shut, people were not moving out, we were still not meeting air quality norms. So what is the source of pollution then? We have to recognize that land itself is a significant source of dust in our part of the world. And we have to take that into serious consideration now, both in Pakistan as well as in Punjab. Agriculture and land is a significant source of pollution that we must recognize. And why I'm saying this, again, is our understanding of pollution has come from Western world. Think about it, Western world started looking at air pollution and especially vehicular pollution when they had no problem of solid cooking fuel. Europe had already stopped solid cooking fuel. Agriculture burning was never a major issue in Europe, and therefore their major pollution was industries and transport sector. That's not the case with us. We still use large scale solid fuel. We still burn agriculture residues. And then on top of it, we have industries and transport sector. So we haven't solved our basic problem. That is, how do we reduce emissions from agriculture, solid fuel, and then start looking at other things. We have done in opposite. We have looked at automobile first without looking at the large problem of emissions coming out from agriculture and household, solid cooking fuel, which Karthik was talking about. I just want to give you some idea of what we are burning in India to substantiate this point. India annually burns 2 billion tons of material. Out of that, about 950 million ton is coal. About 400 to 500 million ton is biomass. About 250 million ton is oil. About 50 million ton is garbage and other waste that we burn. And then about 50 million tons of LNG equivalent gas. This is what our energy basket is. Of this energy basket, 85% is coal and biomass. Now, if we assume that what we burn contribute to pollution, then 85% of our pollution is coming from solid fuel, whereas our entire focus is on liquid fuel. So I think we, in India and Pakistan, and in fact, in our part of the world, we now have to seriously look at what we are addressing for air pollution. I think by focusing just on cities and automobiles, we are missing 85% of the problem. And that's what India and Pakistan also has to look at it carefully. In fact, there is now discussion in India on both these coal as well as biomass being replaced with gas as well as with electricity, and a much more stringent standard has been put on thermal power plants. So that's the first point I wanted to make. And I have a different...
Yeah, I'm fine, tell me quickly.
The second point I would like to make is that as far as burning of residue is concerned, it's a technological problem. And I think Anam very, very eloquently discussed that point, that it's actually a technology transfer issue. I mean to say, we use single blade combine harvesters, which leaves large amount of stubble in the ground. But you now have in market, double blade combine harvester, which doesn't do that, which actually cuts the stubble as well as the grain. The top blade cuts the grain, and the bottom blade cuts the stubble. So I do not, we can keep talking about multiple reasons for this, but as far as I think, my study shows that it is purely a technological problem. We got a technology which was not suitable for us. We got a single blade combine harvester, whereas we should have got, which was actually designed for wheat crop, and we started using it for paddy crop. But now we should get combine harvester, which is a double blade combine harvester, if both of us impose conditions now that over the next few years we will not allow single blade combine harvester and modify all our combine harvester to double blade, this problem shouldn't be there. We should be able to significantly resolve the problem of stubble burning that is there. The last point I want to make is that monitoring is a problem everywhere. And it is a problem because, again, it's a technology problem. The monitors that we are buying are too expensive. Delhi, for example, is setting up monitor at 1 crore rupees per monitor. That's not affordable. And therefore, we need to now think about monitors which are much more affordable to all of us. And fortunately, in the market now, we have monitors which are affordable, which are sensor-based monitor, which can give you a reasonable good air quality data at maybe $300 per piece, or even less than that. And that's where also a lot of cooperation can happen in terms of technology transfer of supplying large-scale, low-cost monitor to entire South Asia. In fact, SAARC can do it. These are not very expensive technology, and statistically speaking, if you have 1,000 monitors, it cancels out error that you will have in the monitoring data. So the other point I want to make is that monitoring is not a challenge if we make up our mind to move away from highly accurate and expensive monitors to much more smart and affordable monitor, which will allow us to do large scale monitoring in villages and cities and other places. So let me end with this, that I do not want to reiterate the point of what my other colleagues have said. I think Karthik has clearly said the source apportionment study we are doing, but it is good to do a study, but at the end of the day, we need to, the condition is such that we need to start taking action now, because the air quality is really poor. And I think there are a number of low-hanging fruits that we need to now implement quickly. Lastly, on the point of Anam about having a bilateral or within the South Asia, because Bangladesh also has, except for Sri Lanka, actually, Sri Lanka has much better air quality than everyone in SAARC. Every other country, Nepal has very poor air quality right now. Bhutan is reasonably better, of course. But Nepal, India, Pakistan, Afghanistan, all these areas have very, very poor air quality. And we should now think about discussing solutions. I believe that we are at this stage where we can keep studying the problem, but I think we need to start talking about solution and how do we share solution with each other. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Chandra Bhushan. We are doing very good time. All of you have kept within the time, and now we have.
Yeah, with your permission, may I just have a small intervention?
Please go ahead.
Hi, thank you, Chandra. Thank you so much for bringing up this important issue of low-cost monitors and the need for shifting away. In fact, I wanted to cover this and it's completely slipped my mind because I was doing impromptu. So one of the things that we've recently gotten into doing, and as Chandra has rightly mentioned, and I think there have been interventions. Bharti has, of course, been part of, one of these low-cost monitoring initiatives, along with, one of the Indian setups, Atmos. So as part of an academic initiative with IIT Delhi and UC Berkeley, we have close to about 300 to maybe 400 devices that we want to deploy in the Indo-Gangetic plain, right? To understand really, as what Chandra has said, right? The implications of, land use on, on emissions and as a result on ambient air pollution itself. And we of course understand that the Pakistani side of it is very much part of the continuum that is the Indo-Gangetic plain, and we are exploring possibilities of how do we get this project to also focus on the other side of the border, and any sort of help that we can get from, of course, the people that are present on this call itself, attendees as well as the panelists, would be appreciated. Of course, we're going to start from the easily attended geographies, which is basically, I think, perhaps the Indian side of it and maybe some parts of Bangladesh, because we have maybe a collaborator there. We haven't yet reached out to any entities on the other side of the border, and if we are able to actually get it across, I think that will be a fantastic achievement to ensure that we're sort of actually able to track movement of pollution, so to say, the plumes, right? Whether it's from burning, whether it's from large regional sources, transboundary and whatnot, and then try and see what is it that we can do to address it. So I just thought I'd lay it out before I forget, and I hope we'll be able to collaborate on this effectively over the next. It's a 3-year long effort, so we have some time to go, but maybe sometime in 2022, I think we'll probably get to the Pakistan side of it. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. I couldn't help but notice that today, where I am sitting in Hyderabad, North Hyderabad, the particulate matter outside my houses is 40. Most of the south, this is not a real problem which has come onto us. Most of our air pollution here is based on automobile pollution. Most of the south has now gone off brick kilns also, because good soil is not available, so everybody's moving on to aerated concrete bricks. So the conditions even within India are different. Calcutta, Bombay has a different kind of air pollution, which is more chemicals in it, more industrial. But it's on the seacoast, and the air blows over every day. But Delhi, Lahore, Kathmandu, Dhaka, all are geographically linked together in one big plain and in a bowl. And I think their problems are very different. And Chandra Bhushan highlighted this aspect of agriculture and land being a major pollutant, which is true, but it's not so true of the rest of the country. Which is why, the Delhi centricity of the dialogue right now throughout the country will create a set of solutions which will be useful there. But we are here going in the polluting our air with hydrocarbons, and the Prime Minister just announced that we will double refining capacity in 5 years. It worries me. And we have to think of, we've got a traffic problem, and that adds to the air pollution. Average time taken to traverse 1 kilometer in Hyderabad, which is the best among the metros, is 18 minutes. You can imagine what's happening in Bangalore, in Chennai, and Delhi. Delhi is about 25 minutes a kilometer. So, all this will add to our air pollution. And I'm sure the situation is the same in Lahore. So we'll have to have a comprehensive policy look at this. Electric vehicles. Now, if you get into electric vehicles, the electric vehicle tariff structure today is against it. Import of hydrocarbon fuels, there's not only hydrocarbon fuel pollution, there is the plastics pollution out of it. And so we will have to take a new tariff structure of crude oil imports. Crude oil imports today are taxed at 29%, which makes downstream plastics also very cheap, relatively cheap. For instance, why are we using so much of single-use plastics? You need a comprehensive policy for that also. These are all very powerful interests also, but you have to deal with it at some stage or other. You can't go on adding refining capacity. And like Rafay said, that the four-wheeler industry in Pakistan is resisting EVs. Here in India, we would have the same problem with the people who control hydrocarbon refining and also manufacturing. So EVs today are very expensive, and there's no lithium battery production in India worth the name. So it'll have to be imported. So we'll have to have a new duty structure. And I was looking at automobile duty structures just yesterday. A hybrid car is taxed at the highest rate at 48%, whereas a petrol burning car will be taxed at 23%. Now, this is illogical because something which is more economical in fuel consumption gets slammed so as to you don't import it. Whereas you can import a large car, with an imported engine at a lesser duty. So I think we need to rationalize all this also. Now, Karthik raised a very interesting question of rice not being grown in traditional rice growing areas. Rice, you were left with this problem because you got rice's production is also shifted to Punjab. And as long as minimum, I don't think Pakistan has this problem, this MSP, minimum procurement price, minimum, which is higher than the cost of production, than the market price. Market price of wheat, for instance, today is 1,300 rupees a quintal, and MSP procurement is 1,900 rupees a quintal. There's similar differential for paddy. So there will be in an area which is where 90% of the land, arable land, is under agriculture, and 88% of that arable land is under irrigation, like Punjab and Haryana, which are with free electricity. You're going to have this huge concentration on production there. And MSP prices only incentivize more production and more of this cultivation. I think we should look at a regime of when rice procurement doesn't take place in non-traditional areas. When rice goes, for instance, 66% of the procurement, total procurement of food grains in India takes place in Punjab, Haryana, and Western UP. Punjab alone takes 80% of that. Now, this is something which we need to look at and have a serious discussion. You can't have this lobster. I'm sure it's the same situation in Pakistan, where the bulk of the agricultural areas are located in one province. If there is procurement in India, it should be distributed equitably between the states. Why is there no procurement of rice in Bengal, which is a traditional rice growing area? There could be more procurement of rice in Karnataka and in Tamil Nadu, and even in the Telugu speaking areas, which are traditional rice growing areas. I think we need to look at a whole bundle of policies. Then you'll be able to address the stubble burning issue. Otherwise, and this fuel policy also needs to look at. If you have desertification at the rate you desertify, desert is at the outskirts of Delhi, and you don't have tree plantations, you don't have tree screens, the Aravalli is getting denuded. So you're going to have more and more problems with air. And I think both countries, since these are the two major countries involved in this, we need to have a joint mechanism like we have for water, where the basin is monitored by both countries together, and theoretically they're working together. We need an air quality monitoring system with both countries work together. And if there are problems with technology, there are problems, we can exchange information, exchange technology. We can even exchange meters, air pollution meters. I think India can afford, if the meter costs are so low, it's in our own interest to put some meters in Pakistan. And so the political consciousness of both areas need to be increased so that the policymakers start taking a different look at this. Otherwise, we will keep going down this road without learning any lessons. Now, I've been going to China for many years. Most of my economic work looks at China. And I've been looking at air pollution in China. Of course, their system is very different. They're able to deal with problems very quickly and effectively and drastically. I went to Shaanxi province almost 15 years ago, and you could barely see 20 yards in front of you. There was so much of air pollution because Shaanxi is a coal mining area, and every third backyard was producing steel. Every third corner had a coal burning power station, because the powers that we said steel output and electricity output must increase, and they did it. But now they just go switched off. It won't be easy for us to switch off so easily, but we need to look at some of the experiences in China with the cleanup taking place even in Beijing is massive compared to what we're doing in India. We're not even looking at it. We're still doing, Punjab blames Delhi for something, Delhi blames Punjab. And so it goes on. The debate is vitiated by politics. And I'm afraid that this debate is going to get vitiated by India-Pakistan politics also. I think, therefore, I think it devolves very heavily on this kind of a gathering, this kind of panel, people like you who are focused on one subject and focused on the issue to work together on this. And maybe through this initiative, we will get a joint India-Pakistan non-governmental monitoring policy. And I'm glad that CSDR is taking this initiative to look at this particular subject in isolation, taking it out of the rest, which is what I had been trying in the last 2 years on the Chao track. And I'm glad that Happy Mon and Tisha have picked this up, and we'll have more of these discussions. So thanks very much. And now, if any of the panelists have any comments to make on each other's
can I make a small
statement.
intervention?
Yeah, please do that.
I think we have a question from Ms. Isha Sharma. I'm just going to read out the question on behalf of Isha. I hope that's okay with you. The question's from Ms. Zeb and Mr. Chandra Bhushan. She's asking, when it comes to bilateral and regional cooperation, especially scientific cooperation that prioritizes technology innovation and transfer, where would you place politicians in enabling those conditions? Policies that focus on scientific solutions do not take place in a political vacuum. So in what ways do you see India-Pakistan politics shaping those cooperative scientific solutions? Thanks, Isha, for your question.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Rafay?
It's for Ms. Anam and Mr. Chandra Bhushan.
Okay.
Yeah. Mr. Bhushan, would you like to go first?
Yeah. Okay. See, the virtual world gives us, frankly, a lot of freedom to do things which was not there. In fact, there is a happy so-called, situation that has come out of pandemic is that the virtual world has become real, and technology transfer in virtual world can also happen. So if you look at smart technology, smart monitors that are there, in last few years in India, smart monitors has been a good mix of Chinese hardware and Indian software. But this is a fascinating story that people have not written about. So Chinese are very big in making sensors, whether electrochemical sensors or membrane sensors. They have large scale production, and they can produce it at a much cheaper cost. We have also started producing some sensors in Bangalore. Indian Institute of Science is taking some lead in developing nanotechnology sensors. In last 20 years, sensor technology has actually beaten Moore's law by a large margin. The weight has come down by 1,000 times. The price has come down by 1,000 times. The efficiency has increased by 1,000 times. In fact, there's a billion times improvement in sensor technology that has happened in last decade. Now, what Indian software industry and smart young guys, what they did was they understood very clearly that sensors require software. So they married the hardware of China, and China doesn't have software knowledge on sensors so much as Indians have. So today there is a proliferation of companies in India who are making, as I said, sensor-based air pollution monitors from, I have a list of 200 of them, from as low as $100 to $300 to do PM 2.5 and PM 10 monitoring. In fact, if you go to hotels in Delhi today, you can see at number of places these small air pollution sensors that are there. I think there is a huge opportunity to cooperate between researchers and scientists between these two countries online. It need not be a business interaction. It can be research cooperation that can happen. And as I said, it is a public good because both countries are suffering because of pollution. I think there is also transboundary transfer of pollution that is there. First of all, we need to understand how much it is. Right now, we do not have exact figure on this, but it is in interest of both the countries that air pollutions are reduced. In fact, it is in the interest of South Asia that air pollution is reduced everywhere. So all of us are safe.
True.
Can I add to that?
Yeah, please.
So Chandra has very eloquently described the technologies that are actually required. Just wanted to make two quick additions to that. The first is that it's not necessary for us to only be thinking about very high cost technologies or very technical technologies. So I did mention the Happy Seeder machine earlier. There's also catalytic converters, which are being considered, I believe, on both sides of the border and being put into regulations as well. And there's also, for example, wet scrubbers that have been used in different countries for capturing carbon. But what I would like to just add is that there are also other simpler ways and simpler technologies that could be very easily implemented on both sides of the border. One of these, for example, is the installation of early warning systems, so that information on both sides of the border, especially in terms of a public health situation in the peak seasons where we have a lot of photochemical smog on both sides of the border. So the sharing of such information for the general public is something that could be potentially very useful. The second thing is, as far as political actors and bilateral conversations take place, like I said, money is not necessarily, or like very expensive technology transfer, I think, is a key component, by the way. But what I'm trying to say is that no amount of money or human resource will actually be able to contribute to a political change or a political stance on the situation. The deciding factor has actually got a lot more to do with the cooperation, the coordination, and the trust between both countries. And that's something that I think the scientific community, the policy community, the civil society community that we are all a part of would actually be playing a very large role within each country to actually encourage dialogue between the political forces on both sides of the border to actually start taking this issue seriously.
I just want to add one point on which is on groundwater level reduction. That I think Shelly Kedia has raised that issue. I just want to address that. It's very fascinating to look at agriculture in Punjab. I think on both sides of the border. Stubble burning doesn't happen with basmati paddy. Many people don't know this. In fact, basmati paddy is cut by hand on both sides of the border. Because basmati paddy stubble is a very valuable fodder. So no farmer uses combine harvester to cut basmati paddy. They only cut paddy which is non-basmati, and therefore they can burn it because it is not valuable. Now, this entire debate in India that this stubble burning is a problem because there is a restriction on groundwater withdrawal falls on the face of this reality. If large measure, and in Haryana, 80%, I think 60% of the farm is actually basmati paddy. So during the time period, which is the short time period, if 60% of Haryana can manually cut paddy, then I don't think this argument is correct that the time restriction has led to burning of stubble in our part of Punjab. I think we need to debunk this theory. The burning is largely a result of combine harvester. It is not the time frame. Because in any case, anyone who lives in India and village knows that the harvesting period is not more than 6 weeks. Even if you're manually doing it. Any part of India, if you go, we generally harvest within 4 to 6 weeks. Whatever is there. And the same argument is, you can also see the part of Punjab in Pakistan, they are burning it, but there's no restriction in Punjab, Pakistan, as far as groundwater withdrawal law is concerned. So the point I'm trying to make is that we are putting unnecessarily, blaming a law, which I don't think has anything to do with stubble burning. The groundwater law of Punjab and Haryana I don't think has any relation with the stubble burning in Punjab and Haryana.
I'd like to make one comment regarding vehicle fuels. Now, the cost structure of the various fractionates of fuel oil, of crude oil, also has impacts how much pollution there is in the air. Because if you take diesel, and you might have your stage 4, stage 5, you can have catalytic converters for all your cars, everything. The catalytic converter will get poisoned if you have polluted fuel. Now, the industrial solvent, there are many industrial solvents which are one step away fractionates from diesel. You should look at the quantity of these industrial solvents produced in India. If all the paint industries, all the pharmaceutical industries, everybody, if you take all their consumption into account, we still produce 4 or 5 times that. And where is this going? This goes to spike our diesel. Now, whatever you do in Delhi or in North India or anywhere in India where you've got diesel vehicles running, if you have this cost differential between the solvents and diesel, 1 bottle of the solvent, you can spike one bottle of diesel, 1 liter of solvent to 1 liter of diesel. The price differential is almost 20 rupees. So the gas station, he only gets 2 or 3 rupees a liter for diesel. Now the incentive to spike it is very high. Look at every other gas station in the countryside is selling spiked diesel. That's why people are now look out for company-operated gas stations. This is an issue which is not being dealt with because we have this uneven duty structure. So you got to take out the economic incentives of spiking fuel. So whatever regulations you might have in Delhi, otherwise not going to work, or Bombay or anywhere, it's not going to work. Yeah.
With your permission, Mr. Guruswamy. So since you brought up the issue of transport-related emissions, and and Rafay referred to this this use of Euro 2 fuel. So and I just brought up a link in the chat which refers to this entity urban emissions by a colleague collaborator of ours, Sharad Guttikunda, who's based out of Goa. So sitting there, right, he basically does these forecasts. I mean, and of course, all that requires is the technical capacity to build it. But really, much of the information that has gone into building that model has happened remotely. It's not like living in Delhi has necessarily been needed for him to develop this, and he can do that for pretty much any part of the country. And I think it has been very useful in trying to understand, right, what the contributors to Delhi's air quality has been on a regular basis, right, for people who follow this forecast. And I think such a system can easily be established, and I think it will give impetus to understanding what the sources of air pollution are in the Pakistan context. Of course, it requires a little bit of groundwork in trying to sort of maybe first, maybe detail what the sources of air pollution are slightly better, right? And for this, the basic emissions inventory, as they call it, is maybe needed. And and of course, we can work with the establishments in Pakistan itself to do it. Because today, even in the case of India, for instance, right, if you don't look at entities like Sharad, the predominant forecasts are done with emissions inventory that are of universities and whatnot overseas. So only with the advent of people like Sharath have you actually started getting stuff that is actually locally sourced, information that speaks to what the source of emissions are within the country. So if somebody were to actually look at what emissions are coming out of Pakistan, right? If the people sitting in a university overseas don't have a sense of what actually burns in Pakistan, right? That is it Euro 2, is it Euro 3, is it Euro 4? We'll never get to know. Right. So I think to that extent, doing an exercise that basically details what the sources of emissions are, right? Even at course resolution will give us a very good flavor for will give a very good input for these modeling kind of efforts, right? And we can easily facilitate the modeling of air quality for important urban centers, or for that matter, any other area in Pakistan itself. And I think I mean, the sad part is, of course, the traction that an entity like urban emissions gets within India itself is not much. But that said, given that there isn't a setup right now in Pakistan, as Rafay is saying, right, it probably is worth sort of, trying to invest in a little bit of capacity building, right, to understand what the sources of air pollution are. And then, as Shelley has brought up, what should we internationalize this? Now, today, if you look at it, right, the contribution from, across the border, as far as India, the domain is concerned, is probably between 5 and 10%. Again, it will depend on which geography you're looking at, right? So no more than that really comes in, right? So Punjab, it's about 9%. Delhi, it says about 5%. UP is at about 5 or 6%. Right. So given that that's the level of contribution from overseas, do we really want to internationalize it for that 5% when the 95% is really sitting within? I'm not necessarily sure, but maybe that number is not 5%. Maybe because, all these models have got it wrong and they don't actually understand, the kind of, emitting activities that are predominant in other parts of, South Asia outside of India. So maybe in an effort to, clarify that, we could go down this path and, again, welcome all approaches from collaborators and whatnot in Pakistan to try and see what we can do on those lines. Yeah. So thank you.
Can I just come in here? Thanks, Karthik, for your comments. And he referred to Shelley's question. I'll just read that question out for all of our attendees as well. The question is addressed to Mr. Rafay Alam and to Mr. Chandra Bhushan as well. She's asking, will internationalizing air pollution work for India and Pakistan? We don't have rich neighbors in South Asia. She mentions that China had Japan, which was affected by smog. So she's asking if internationalizing will really help India and Pakistan.
Rafay, it's addressed to you, I think.
Well, in my experience, campaigning for air quality outside Pakistan, trying to raise attention about air quality in Pakistan, and I don't mean this in any sort of antagonistic way, has been an uphill challenge when India, as a next door neighbor, is also campaigning for air quality issues. And I found that when I've spoken to people in the United States or in the European Union, it's the Indian issues that are predominant. And that is very much, I think, a function of Pakistani activists and stakeholders in the public sector properly articulating an air quality issue. My dog Luna likes to peer out of the window and bark at cats, so please excuse her. And so I think internationalizing the issue, as Karthik was pointing out, there's not much pollution that goes on either side. But one thing that internationalizing an India and Pakistan issue will do is create a sense of goodwill around the world, because when you have two antagonistic nations cooperating on something, it will raise attention on the international level and bring attention, specifically scientific research-based attention to the region, which is very much needed. And so that's one potential and hope I have for internationalizing the issue.
True, very true. And this is probably along with groundwater, one of the two areas in which we can cooperate without too much of animosity, blocking that.
We have one more question. It's from Mr. Suresh, and it's to all panelists. He's saying, on the one hand, we say that we need to switch to gas in industries, and on the other hand, we're suggesting we need to use agricultural residue-based briquettes in industries. What's your take on this contradiction, perhaps?
I have a view on this, if I may quickly express it. So, and maybe Chandra, of course, has also worked on this extensively. So on this, right, so briquetting and things like that, if you look at it, I mean, the alternative is if you burn it in the field, of course, you're not capturing the energy potential of it, which happens in a big way on both sides of the border. But the fact is that, to convert it to usable, pellets and briquettes, the amount of money that's required is fairly significant. It's not easy, the transport specifically, and also the pelletization and briquetting of it. So unless you're using it within a radius of about 100 kilometers, perhaps, right, it might actually start becoming very difficult for it to compete with other commercially available fuels. So if you do find a local use, I think there is a use case for the briquetting. On the gas part, I think, unfortunately, India is not endowed with, even the amount of gas that Pakistan has access to. We've not had significant finds that have actually, materialized. So that's always been sort of like this, this mirage that we've pursued. Gas kabhi aayega, and the global prices will go down. But I think in the interest of, air quality, it's certainly, that discussion is true, I think, for many large industries that can probably shift. But for smaller setups that are actually able to use it, the briquetting is an option if you're located close to large sources of biomass, which again is phenomenal in the case of India. But if you ask somebody how much biomass is actually available on the ground to be used, no agency will actually come forward and tell you, this is the amount that's there. So that assessment as well is missing. We know about the 1 million tons that get burnt in Punjab and other parts of the country, but what is readily available to industries in and around, certain areas, there's not that clear assessment. So I think it's, it's that, again, that also becomes a mirage because you're not really sure of what the potential is. I'll leave it at that. Yeah.
I see, you must understand one thing, that for every ton of food we produce about 2.5 to 3 ton of biomass. No, I'm sorry, 1.5 to 2 ton if you take all the crops together. Now, which means that we are endowed with biomass. The only problem is that we burn biomass in a very polluting way. So going ahead in future, even if we move to, say, electricity, and I'll come back to that point, or to, for example, to gas, we will have to do something with hundreds of millions of tons of biomass that we have. I can back of the envelope calculation, I can tell you right now that if all the biomass of India is converted into oil, it is equivalent to 100 million tons of oil. Okay, close to half of our total oil consumption. So if we use modern technology of, gasification and other things, that is the equivalent of energy that is there in biomass. And we should have a biomass mission to use biomass in a very cleaner and modern way. Okay, whether you use gasification technology, plasma technology, there are a number of modern technologies that are coming, which will allow us to do that. The second point is that as electricity becomes 24/7, number of current technology will become obsolete. So even with taxation structure that government of India has, or any country has taxation structure to penalize electric vehicle, it is quite clear that within the period of 5 to 6, 10 years, internal combustion engine can't compete with electric motors, both in terms of cost of production, as well as in terms of operational cost. It is just a matter of time. Okay. Of course, there is a geopolitical issue of trace elements and lithium and other things that we will have to resolve, but that should not stop us from moving to a modern technology. And I want to say this because I'm on, there is a lot of discussion that, we should not go to electrical because China has hold over all of lithium and other things. I think that's a really bad approach. We need to look at alternate lithium sources, but that should not stop whether any country in the world to move to modern technology, which is cleaner, efficient, environmentally sound, and economical. So the point I'm trying to make is electricity. I always give this example to everyone. Think about it. To meet our energy need, we actually have 4 pipelines of energy. We have coal transportation, we have electricity line, we have gas network, and we have petrol pumps. Think about how inefficient we are as a society, that to meet our energy need, we need 4 ways to get that energy, which actually in the future, we will just get from one electric line. Our vehicles can move on electricity. We can cook food on electricity. We can run our houses on electricity. We can run our industries on electricity. So I mean to say, we have to think about a future which is much more progressive than what we are thinking right now in our part of the world. And I don't think that this incremental changes that we are planning right now is suitable for us. We should be thinking about leapfrogging. In fact, we should be thinking about pole vaulting in all of these areas if we want to see cleaner air, prosperity in our part of the world.
Okay, I think we have one more question, and there's already an interesting conversation going on in the chat box between Karthik and Ms. Zeb. I'll just read it out. It's from Mr. Arindam Datta from Terry. He asks, should we focus on energy from crop residue or incorporation of crop residue to soil to improve the soil carbon and reduce the soil loss and productivity in the Indo-Gangetic plain? Ms. Zeb and Karthik, would you like to just, take a shot at it?
Karthik, do you want to go first, or would you be okay?
So very briefly, I think, this is an area that's just, we've just looked at it only for about the last 3 or 4 years. So I'm not really an expert on this, but our conversations with, the Punjab Agriculture University community and the Border Organization for South Asia, which hopefully, really does work in South Asia and not just India, suggests that incorporation, mulching, getting the residue back into the soil is perhaps the best way of giving it back to nature, right? But unfortunately, as Anam has rightly said, farmers have the view that, not just potash, but they really feel that it kills, pests that might be sort of, remnants in the field, takes away rats, ensures that, that the seed that they sow after the rice crop for wheat is not eaten by, these rats and whatever that have, that may have infested the field. So lots of these kinds of, sentiments are there. But unfortunately, all of these are, at least as far as the scientific community goes, they say it is not valid. And that's exactly what, the proponents of the happy seeder and the like say, right? That you actually save on fertilizer use, right? Fertilizer, which is largely imported as far as India is concerned, primarily because the input is imported, saves on water because, you actually create a cooler microclimate for the next crop because, you're allowing for that, that mulch to stay on there for much longer. So the benefits are many, but not easily quantified unless you've done a thorough study of it. And these studies are really sort of underway right now. And it'll be fantastic, if both sides of the border are able to actually incorporate these learnings in the way they practice agriculture. But again, as I said, given that the farmer is ultimately the one who is bearing the risk of, whether there's a failure of this technology or not, it's easier said than done to say, shift to a different technology today, you will get better yields 3 years from now, right? If not, right, what happens to their, chances of surviving this very next season? And I think in that really is the biggest challenge in making farmers move to more sustainable practices, and which India has not done successfully. And as we saw this season, everybody's expecting things to be better, but it turned out to be a big blowout at the end of the day.
Yeah, just wanted to add to that actually, that like I mentioned earlier, it has to make economic sense to the farmer. And we really have to, look at this from I'm sorry to use NGO jargon here, but to look at it from a more bottom-up perspective. The farmer, like I mentioned earlier, a study that I was reading yesterday noted that in the Punjab side of the country, burning the crop residue was actually 34% cheaper for the farmer than using it in other methods, which would have probably been for livestock consumption or, I believe in India, there have been, experiments in using it for energy generation, the crop residue, but these need a lot of scaling up to do. So, I mean, at the end of the day, other than capacity building, the awareness of farmers, you have to take into consideration two things. The first is the smallholder. The reality is that I think on both sides of the border, you have a large majority of farmers that have very small land holdings. So the economic viability of such methods and what would make economic sense to them is actually what the government should be focusing on. So make it actually more cost effective for the farmers to actually be engaging in mulching and tillage and technology such as the happy seeder. Make it actually cheaper for the farmers to access these technologies rather than focusing on more high tech or things like that. And then the second thing actually is also just to focus on scaling up these technologies. So like the earlier question, which was to do with the briquettes and the biomass burning, etc. We know that these are happening on a smaller scale, and we know that there is work going on. I also know that the startup techs on both sides of the border are actually working on agricultural solutions, whether that's to do with water or whether that's to do with even developing indigenous air quality monitors. So, kind of encouraging these sorts of things is what are some of the policy measures that can be taken on both sides. And then, of course, information sharing. Chandra actually shared earlier that India has possibly been working on these issues quite a few years before Pakistan. And this is exactly the kind of information sharing and what we would like to learn from India is how they have actually been working on these issues possibly a decade in advance of Pakistan. So picking up what has worked for you and then adding to that on our side of the border as well. Ideally, these are some of the measures that we could take.
I just want to add, because Anab has spoken about happy seeder multiple times. Happy seeders are not working in India. Let me just say that straight away to you.
No, that's not true. That's not true. That's not true. We shouldn't be making blanket statements here when we don't have the technical experts. I'm sorry about that.
Karthik, you can respond later on. Okay. Just because you have a project on it doesn't mean other person cannot have an opinion on it. Okay. Please. So let me just say that happy seeder as a technology is for zero tillage. It's a zero tillage technology. And so are super seeders. These are technology which tells farmer not to till the soil. These technologies are excellent compared to tillage technology. This has huge environmental benefits. But to change from tillage technology, which our farmers have used for centuries, to zero tillage technology is a social change. It is not a technological change. So if someone is saying that use happy tiller and it will solve air pollution, that's not true. It will take huge amount of time for farmers to move from a century-old practice of tillage farming to zero tillage farming. So I think we need to understand where happy seeder or super seeder has advantage. They do not have short-term advantage of air pollution. They are not designed to reduce air pollution. I think that's first thing which we need to understand. They have huge advantage in ecological terms. They will reduce your water consumption. They will make your soil better. They will improve productivity. All those things they will do. But it is a social change of a farming method which our farmers have done for centuries. So that's the point I was trying to make. Point number two is that therefore it is not that Indian farmers or Pakistani farmers have not used biomass for mulching in the soil. You know, there's a saying in agriculture sector in India that our farmers practice agro, silvio, horticulture and pastoralist. It means agriculture system in our part of the world is both tree, animal and crop together. And residues were fed to the animals so that cow dung can be used in the soil. So there was a way in which we were mulching it. We have always done it. But over a period of time, as animal population has reduced, that mulching practice is not happening. So if you are thinking about reducing air pollution from happy seeder, that's not a solution in short term. Happy seeder has its uses, but that is a much more long-term ecological uses. That's the point I was trying to make.
Okay, I think we're quickly running out of time. Mr. Guruswamy, would you like to make your concluding remarks, please?
Yeah, I'm back. I lost you
yes,
guys.
we
for
lost
about 10
you
minutes.
for a bit.
Yeah, but I think, we've had a good discussion, and I think we've covered whatever ground we could cover today, and the need for a more in-depth look at this issue, this problem, and I hope CSDR takes it upon itself to initiate a joint panel to work on this, to highlight to both the systems and also to opinion leaders on both sides of the. And later on, it can be expanded to Bangladesh and Nepal. Sri Lanka happily is out of this because they are much better off than us in this issue. So I'm glad we had this today. Thank you, Tisha. Thank you, Happy Mon. Thank you, Rafay. And and Chandra Bhushan, listening to you, perspective. Karthik, thank you very much for coming today. Your perspective was also very interesting. Nice meeting you. Hope we'll see you guys in the Chow Dialogue sometime in wherever it's next. Maybe have it in Hyderabad. I'd be glad to host it here for you guys. And let's see how things go. Thank you very much. Tisha?
Yep. Thank you so much, sir. I'll just like to end this roundtable discussion by highlighting a crucial point that's emerged from all of the discussions we've had around crop, residue burning, air quality monitoring, even with respect to water table as well, which is that when it comes to smog and poor air quality, which is directly impacting millions of people in India and Pakistan, bilateral and regional cooperation is not something nice to have, or it's not a cliche. We have no other alternative. And the nature of the challenge is such that it dictates that the two countries cooperate, come together, the scientific communities, as well as politicians and policymakers. Thank you to all the 4 panelists for joining us today, Mr. Bhushan, Mr. Alam, Ms. Zaif, and of course, Karthik, thank you so much for coming in and sharing your views and opinions with us. A very big thank you to Mr. Mohan Guruswamy for chairing the roundtable today. Thank you to all who came in and heard and listened to this very unique and enriching discussion. We had experts from India and Pakistan joining us, which doesn't happen very often. So thank you for joining in. Please join us again for future CSDR initiatives. Thank you and have a good day.